What's up? Welcome into the Irish Huddle podcast. It's Wednesday, September 30th, 2020. I'm Patrick Engel, joined by Lou Somogyi. And as of Wednesday, we have good news, at least, the start of some good news, what we hope, for Notre Dame's hopes to slowly come out of this 3-week layoff that it's found itself in. Lou, I would think. You saw the return to practice as at least the good first step in good news?
Yeah, yesterday, Patrick, was the first time, I think, since last February that I stepped into the Guglielmino Athletics complex. I was allowed in, and right away it looks sort of like an airport terminal with all the hand sanitizers and everything else. You have to go through almost little stages there before you enter. It's like going into the land of Oz. Not know how, but I had to drop some things off, and secretary told me then that the noise back there is their in conditioning work, which sounded very optimistic there. And of course, earlier, Brian Kelly had indicated that the plan was to return to practice on Wednesday, but wow, to just be back at that facility and see and realize that, wow, it's been 8 months since I've stepped in here, when used to be there fairly weekly. It was an encouraging sign. And these are the kind of little victories during the course of what's going on with this pandemic that you just try to embrace and savor.
Yeah, it finally feels like that endless month of March is a long time ago, right? Like that's good.
Well, it was a long time ago, but at the same time, it's been a long season between now and then. There's so much skepticism, so much doubt, and there still is. There's no way that we can just declare they're out of the woods just because they're back in conditioning work, or even just because they're back at practice. This is going to be day by day, right through, December and maybe even January.
Yeah, how many decades ago does that season opener against Duke feel like? Ages, right? Like eons, ice age, kind of. But anyway, best way to support this podcast is to subscribe to blueandgold.com. Please leave us a review, leave us a rating, subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So, Lou, like you indicated, the plan is to come back, and by the time you're listening to this, perhaps on Thursday, you've seen either our reports from Brian Kelly's scheduled availability tomorrow, detailing more into that. But anyway, just to kind of recap how it got to here. The latest testing numbers we have, and this is as of a Monday night announcement, 39 players are in COVID-19 protocols, whether that be isolation or quarantine. 25 of them with positive tests. That's including the 7 from September 21st who tested positive, and then 18 who tested positive in the September 22nd through Sunday round of testing. So it's about a third of the roster. And then still, those numbers will indicate to you, right, that this isn't like over. They're not out of the outbreak per se. It's still, we haven't heard anything official either way on the status of the October 10th game against Florida State. But at some point, like, this is the news you needed to hear, and you can feel optimistic, and reasonably so, that game is going to go on as scheduled, particularly hearing that they will return to practice this week instead of trying to cram everything in and get a bunch of guys back after 2 full weeks off. We know they tested again on Monday. We don't know those results yet. For what it's worth, the school-wide testing dashboard shows 7 positive cases. They test again on Wednesday, so we'll see what happens. They could really use kind of a clean batch of tests on Wednesday to really indicate that, all right, they're finally getting this behind it and stepping forward and multiple steps really in the way you wanted to see.
It was just encouraging even to receive the email yesterday from Claire Kramer, who's with the Notre Dame Athletics media office, that Brian Kelly is going to have a press conference at noon on Thursday, which kind of hopes to be a return somewhat to normalcy this week, because he has conferences Monday at noon and Thursday at noon, plus his radio show on Thursday evenings. So I wasn't anticipating that there would be anything until next Monday. So that they're trying to move forward and get back into a rhythm, even with that, with the media meetings and everything else. And maybe some more light can be shed on it as well. But just the fact that he's going to be available was kind of a positive indicator as well.
And I'm sure we'll hear him elaborate on the initial words out of, or what he had confirmed yesterday in a interview with ESPN about really what happened and why it happened. But the cliff notes of that, and if you're listening to this on Thursday, you've probably read more or heard more from what he said. But they traced it really to a couple of instances: a pregame meal that they have at the hotel, and a player throwing up on the sidelines during the game against South Florida, who was treated for dehydration, but then tested positive the Monday after the game. You assume that he's one of those 7 guys who tested positive on that Monday, but we know who tested negative that Friday, meaning they were available to play in the game as this player in question was. And the pregame meal, that lines up with what Dr. Mark Fox, the St. Joseph County deputy health officer, told me earlier in the week, is that was one thing they were really looking at as a possible spreader event. And that's what it ended up being, right? They're in the hotel room either Friday night or Saturday morning. Those are the 2 pregame meals, and it's easy for that to spread because you're indoors and unmasked. And so they announced a couple of changes for what they're going to do with that. Is they're doing meals more spaced out so they can distance at a convention center. Again, this is all what Brian Kelly has told ESPN in his Tuesday interview with them. And they will have rapid antigen tests available on the sideline during games. And they got to this point basically, and from what Mark Fox told me, was just studying every part of the players' days and what really changed in their routine and their behavior.
I think another one was just the locker room spacing as well. They've already tried to reduce capacity in the preseason and then do it even more so now, where you have just a finite amount of people in the locker room at a given time. So those areas where you're in confined spaces, those were where they traced it back to what were the most dangerous situations.
Right. And then like you mentioned, the locker room is another area Fox had mentioned to me that was something they were looking at in particular. Kelly didn't mention that in his piece with ESPN. I plan on asking him about that in particular tomorrow to see if that's something they're also tweaking in this ever-changing plan of theirs to mitigate this as best they can. And
Patrick, in your interview with Dr. Fox, was there any indication at all of perhaps some procedures being changed or implemented or tweaked to maybe stem this type of tide that occurred? And
I think from
because we're talking about daily testing for the line,
right,
both offense and defense, is this something that you're going to have daily testing now almost for everyone?
I didn't get that indication from him, and really what he said is that he thought the plan was fine. Really, I think the initial changes were the ones that Kelly outlined, of fixing that pregame meal and making it less of a communal team thing like it's been for each of Brian Kelly's first 29 years as a head coach, right? And again, the test on the sideline, like he said, and then we'll see again if it's about the locker room. But just from talking to Dr. Fox, I know that was the locker room was one thing that I'm sure has at least been mentioned to him of reducing that capacity even more.
It's that's the one thing that still just lingers and hovers throughout this entire season is how just one action, whether it's one player vomiting on the sidelines or anything, how fragile this entire season can be.
Yeah, and to go off to the player on the sideline for a moment, and again, this is from what Kelly had told ESPN's Heather Dinich, was player didn't have a concussion or anything like that, that an injury related thing that made him come out of the game. So they just kind of assumed it was dehydration. And of course, this player had tested negative, right? So it's not like I don't really think you can look at this and blame the staff or Kelly for letting, like, how did you let that guy play? You know, he tested negative, right? And from what Fox had told me, any player who tested negative on the Friday but tested positive on the Monday after the USF game, he thinks it's unlikely that they had a mass enough of a contagion level to have spread like everywhere or to USF or anything like that. So again, just for what that's worth. But really, this was about looking at and deconstructing every aspect of their routine that has changed since that summer when all we heard about was, man, they have no cases. They're doing a great job. Pre-game meals had changed. I mean, we know in the summer they were getting meals to go, eating them in their room when they were staying at the Morris Inn. And again, those pre-game meals, like I said, you're unmasked, you're in a closed room, you got one asymptomatic case or two of them, bam, it spreads right there, right? And I think we talked about this last week, but I think it further shows now that the conclusion wasn't just say, oh, blame the students and the players for making a bad choice, right? You're just, as soon as you see this outbreak, especially when, once again, the cases on campus are still pretty low. I mean, at some point last week, I believe it was Monday, or in the span of those 18 positives from the 22nd through Sunday, campus as a whole had 28 reported cases, I think. So the team accounts for over half of that. And this is another thing Fox had mentioned to me, and I'm going to take him at his word here, that they would have heard about a large gathering, large party, something like that through their contact tracers who, in tracing everything and every case that the school deals with in general, have found that people are pretty forthcoming about where they've been and what they've done. So when he says that, no, we didn't find evidence of a large party that furthered this spread, I will take him at what he says to be true, and have no reason not to believe that all right, there was some clandestine massive party, right? It seems pretty hard to do in this era of when those things are just magnets for people to report and say, nope, you can't do that, or just it's a party, it's loud, it's hard to hide.
Yeah, and they did that back in August when they had an initial outbreak, which almost threatened to shut down the university as far as on-campus classes. And there was a period of 2 weeks there where it was online classes before Notre Dame got it under control again. And right away, they were able to detect or trace back to where it originated. So same situation here. I don't think there's going to be much secrets out there with this.
Right.
And, you know, when there's also appropriate measures and discipline taken against the people who created these type of parties or hosted them or whatever, the campus has been very vigilant, and it shows with the overall results. When you have 18 of the 28, you know, you're talking about 60% there, resulting only on the football team, not from the campus. Yet, in essence, 10 from the campus.
Yeah, that's a further indication that no, there's not this mass thing that, all right, as we're talking about it now, it's been, what, 8 days since they announced the postponement of the Wake Forest game. and probably realistically even closer to 2 weeks since they realized, okay, we've got a little bit of a problem on our hands here within the team. I think at that point, even if people were less forthcoming to contact tracers over a span of 10 plus days, you would have figured out if there was a party. So I think just further going to show that this can come from innocuous or seemingly innocuous activities, and even the smallest things in your weekly plan and just regimented hour by hour thing of every week. That's a decision, right? Or something that can be possibly tweaked because this can sneak in there.
Yeah, it's fragile. It's humbling just how fragile it is for everyone. And it takes walking on eggshells to a whole different level.
Yeah, you're not kidding. So that's what's happened. We'll get into what can come in the next 10 days, really, before Florida State. First, we're going to take a quick break. So, Lou, given all of what we had just talked about and seemingly the initial good steps you needed to see, and at least the road for a continued progression down the way you want to see it, just when you heard the news of getting back to practice and presumably getting off the ground like you had to 10 days in advance, I mean, what was your reaction about just how you feel about being able to play that game as scheduled?
Well, you control what you can control. And right now, Notre Dame hopefully has control. What you never know, though, is what about the opponent? It's like I've always compared this to, like, if you follow the rules of the road and you have a impeccable driving record and everything else, that doesn't prevent somebody who might be under the influence or other things, who's driving recklessly, to not create havoc on the road, no matter how much you may follow the rules of the road. And I'm not saying that Florida State isn't or whatever. I'm just saying you can do your part, but you look at the University of Houston. They've had the entire month of September canceled, and it's not always been their fault. And in fact, seldom has it been. So just because you're back practicing and back in the conditioning work and the optimism about, okay, proceed with the season, this can happen to anybody. It could happen to Florida State this week. It could happen to Louisville the following week, or Georgia Tech, or Pittsburgh after that this month. It's a long month ahead. You got 2 games in a row in. Now it's like, can you get 3? Can you get 4? And right now, Notre Dame is scheduled for like 6 straight games. The last 4 here from October 10th through 31st, and then the first 2 in November there with, Clemson, and then at Boston College. So it's one thing for you to be in control right now, which you hope you are, but you just don't know what it's going to be like with the opponent down the road.
And from exactly what you just said, I'm just going to right now send my best wishes to the Big Ten and good luck for trying to somehow get 9 games in 9 weeks in. It just does not seem feasible. And not to say you shouldn't try to do it, but I mean, look at how many of the games are just getting postponed for reasons like you said. This is hard to do, and I know they've got the daily testing that brought them back, but you can't convince me that on December 19th, every Big Ten team will have played an equal number of games. There's just going to be some that get postponed. I mean, this is hard. It's hard to pull off. It requires a lot, and like we've seen here, Notre Dame's things spread from an innocuous game, a pregame meal. Mike Norvell at Florida State has the virus. I mean, we don't think he's going out to the bars and getting this by being negligent, right? So I'm curious to see how they'll pull that off, and really how many teams even end up with a full 9-game schedule out of the Big Ten.
Yeah.
It's a bold plan, but better than nothing if they think it's safe, which obviously they do enough to come back.
Yeah, you got to give it a shot, but they just left themselves no margin for error there. And you know what usually happens with that.
Yeah, and really Notre Dame doesn't have a lot of margin for error
No, it
across
doesn't.
either.
Yeah, it used up its lifeline there for that December 12th game, because I don't know if November 21st, which is another bye week for Notre Dame, would be feasible because everyone else is playing, unless those other teams have cancellations too, and then a couple of games can be moved around to where maybe November 21st does become available. But then you have to move likely the November 27th Friday game at North Carolina, maybe one day ahead, so that you don't have that.
It's yeah, it's like playing a game of Scrabble, right? Where you think you played a really good word on like one of those double word scores, then all of a sudden it's changed, right? Like something, the board was shifted underneath of you, and oh well, now this all of a sudden isn't feasible, or this isn't an attractive option for a game or a open date or whatever. Yeah, it like it's it's a quite a quagmire is I guess what I'll leave it at. But to turn the attention back to Florida State, and we'll get into most of the actual on game or on field happenings next week once this thing feels like more of a certainty, if it indeed gets to that point. If they can get to that point, Notre Dame, they should have no problem with Florida State, because one, they'll have been back at practice for 10 days. That's pretty good, even though, yeah, you'll have absences, probably double-digit absences. I don't know about 39. I mean, for what it's worth, Kelly indicated in his talk with ESPN that he expects to have 90% of the players available for practice on Saturday. We'll see. Obviously, we don't know when each individual person went into quarantine for 14 days or went into isolation for 10 days once they tested positive. But I get the feeling this isn't really a game where it's gonna hurt them too much. I mean, we heard. I don't know if you, Lou, or anyone listening watched Kelly's post game speech. It was posted to NBCSports.com, where he basically said, "We're not going to get another game like this against South Florida, where we can survive without three starters or starters in general." I'm kind of thinking he watched that Florida State meltdown, non-competitive waxing against Miami, and thought, "Yeah, we can beat those guys without a Tariq Bracy or with Jack Kaiser in there at Buck." And I'm just again using the examples of what they were the previous game. I mean, that's a bad football team.
Yeah, it was kind of sobering just watch them on Saturday night. I watched the first half, and I just was shaking my head. That just looks like a fractured, beaten down football team. It looks a lot like the 2007 Notre Dame team that finished 3-9, but a lot more talented. I mean, this goes to show that it's not always about the recruiting rankings. It's about the infrastructure and overall culture in a program. And that culture has been really on a decline for the past 4 years. They're 18-22, even though their recruiting classes have been ranked like number 5, 10, 17, and 20, I believe, over the last 4 years. Look, there's a number of outstanding players on that team, a lot of NFL prospects. Next to Clemson, it's the most talented team on paper on Notre Dame's schedule. That's part of the reason why it's scheduled for a 7:30 p.m. kickoff, that prime time marquee game at night for NBC. That's one of them that they wanted. Florida State sounds good. Well, it sounded good in the 80s, 90s, and then even during the Jimbo Fisher era and Jameis Winston, where they won the national title in 13 and made the playoff in 14. But it just goes to show where once the leadership and the infrastructure collapses internally, as it has, boy, there's a lot to dig out of there. And it showed really more so in the opener, maybe than against Miami, because they're opening at home against Georgia Tech. Not that home field advantage, I guess, really means much this year, but Georgia Tech was picked 15th out of 15 ACC teams in the preseason. poll by the league. And, they're in a rebuilding stage as well from the triple option days. So to lose that and score only 13 points in the game was just an indication. And again, with recruiting rankings, where they are really struggled over the years is the offensive line. They signed only one back in 2017 when they signed about 25 players. They've had only 2 4-stars there for a while. So it shows in the stats. They were 125th last year in sacks given up with 48, and they continue to have those kind of problems this year, both with the run and the pass.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to get worse there before it gets better. So if it gets
Thank you,
better.
Patrick Swayze. Not Patrick Engel, Patrick Swayze.
There we go.
Roadhouse.
All I thought of right there was the Family Guy clip. Whenever someone mentions Roadhouse to me, I think of the Family Guy clip where it's an episode where Peter's just going around doing all kinds of stupid stuff and just saying Roadhouse. I don't know if you watch it, Lou, but like I haven't actually seen the movie. But anyway, I'll take the moniker. But again, getting back to what you said, and anytime you have a third of the roster out, I would have questions. All right, how many teams can you beat? Or can you beat anybody in the ACC or even the Power 5? And again, we'll see what that number ends up being on game day. It shouldn't be that bad. Just when you go back off the timing of when some of these guys started the 10-day isolation and the 14-day quarantine as far back as September 21st or 22nd. But you still got to get them back into practice a few days in advance. And you have a long layoff where a majority of it wasn't spent practicing. So still kind of a variable of you never know what it'll look like when you get out there. I certainly don't think it would be where, let's say they play a very average game by Notre Dame standards and still win. I don't think it's one of those where you start worrying like, oh my God, what's going on with this unit or this thing? Well, yeah, we have no idea what they're gonna look like after such a awkward time that you don't have during the season or plan for at all during the season.
And you just wonder where Florida State's head is right now too. They're going on the road. They've been humiliated. How do they take this? Do they pack it in? Do they come back even more determined to show that they are more capable than what they've displayed? So a lot of it also depends on Florida State's state of mind as well. If they come in with a determined attitude, they're capable. Like I said, it's probably the second most talented team that Notre Dame will play in the regular season based on paper and with the number of pro prospects that they have. But it goes far, far beyond that.
And we've seen our share of wacky stuff already happen in the season here too, with strange upsets and whatnot, and even within the ACC itself. So I want to go back to something that you had mentioned earlier and asked me on the testing. And I'd mentioned that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 wanted to come back because of that daily testing. And what I'd asked Pete Thamel when he came on the podcast last week was, that the daily testing was a game changer for them. So I asked Mark Fox, what do you think? Should they go to this? Have you heard anything about this? And he said that he thinks Notre Dame's current plan should work. In that they're already testing 3 times a week with what he described as a specific, rigorous, powerful test that catches a very low level of virus, more so than an antigen one could. And like he had mentioned to me, and what Brian Kelly had told us a couple of weeks ago, they're already testing the offensive linemen, the defensive linemen every day, just because of how often they spend and how much time they spend in close contact, how much they're breathing on each other, facing each other, all of that. And Fox had told me he asked Jack Swarbrick if they were planning to move to a daily testing model, or if the ACC is planning to. And Swarbrick was pretty non-committal to Fox, is what Fox told me. But to use the Mark Fox's words, I don't think it would make an appreciable difference. That was his exact quote of what would daily testing do from the plan Notre Dame currently has. But clearly, they've been willing to and open to still tweaking that, just as evidenced by the availability now of the rapid tests during the game. So that's enough testing talk. I'm sure you guys are all bored by it now. Let's get into what we've seen from around the ACC just in the first few weeks here. But first, we will take a short break. I don't know about you, Lou, but I have one major takeaway from 3 weeks of ACC action. The U.
Wrong.
I picked him sixth. Yeah, I picked him sixth in the ACC preseason poll, and then the ballot I submitted. I think I had him behind Clemson, Carolina, or Notre Dame, Carolina, Louisville, and Pitt. I'm going to call it right now. They're finishing ahead of at least 2, if not 3 of those. They look good. They have an offense. Like that's a big deal. Derek King is good. This guy had 50 touchdowns in 11 and a half games at Houston 2 years ago. They can score. They couldn't score against anyone last year. I mean, you and I could have stopped them.
Yeah, they were shut out by Skip Holtz's Louisiana Tech team in the bowl game, 14-0, I believe. They're like the Florida State that has awoken, because you always saw Miami, and there's no reason in the world with that type of talent they shouldn't be better. And now you're seeing them that way. The quarterback has made a tremendous difference for their offense, but you want to temper it a little, because you don't know if Miami is that much improved or Florida State has just thrown it in that much. You expected Florida State's defense to be pretty doggone good, and on the first 5 possessions Saturday night, Miami scored touchdowns, and on the 6th they kicked a field goal. All 6 possessions in the first half they scored. Probably could have called their score in the second half as well, but talent has not been the issue necessarily for those Florida teams. I'm not saying that they're at the level that they were in the 80s or 90s when they were regularly competing for the national title, but they should be much better than what they have demonstrated. And that Miami team in 2017 that throttled Notre Dame, they showed signs of that. Maybe that's the kind of team they are this year too, where they're capable of making a run. We'll find out for certain October 10th, the same day Notre Dame plays Florida State. Miami will be at Clemson. So how competitive they are and how legit they are will be answered there.
I don't know, man. I'm in. I mean, these guys couldn't score against Florida International and Louisiana Tech. They were giving up sacks to anybody. Derek King hasn't been sacked in 3 games. And they couldn't put up 50 points on anyone except some like FCS team or something like that. And the quarterback play, and really even at times in that 2017 season, they were good. It was kind of sketchy. You're not seeing anything like that out of their quarterbacks now. So I feel like they're going to be a force, and even if Clemson still stomps them or whatever, I'm not going to be the one out here claiming Miami's a fraud, blah, blah, blah. This team sucks. Like, they should be able to beat most of the teams in that, whatever you want to call second tier, I think. Because like you said, yeah, they had some talent at quarterback. I don't think they really did in recent years, or at least not enough. And now they can protect them. I don't know. I'm encouraged. You don't know. I think we missed out on a Miami Notre Dame game. That's for sure. I mean, that's a lot more interesting to me than Florida State. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it would have been, but a team that is still a bit of a mystery is North Carolina. They've played 1 game, and you don't necessarily know what you have there. But that was another team that was seen as a potential contender for the ACC championship. I thought the dark horse this year could be Pitt just because of the reputation with Pat Narduzzi and their defense. They had probably the best defense coming back on paper in the league this year, even after losing Twyman, a potential top NFL pick along the defensive line. They've been outstanding. And you know what Pat Narduzzi can do with defenses. He did a great job while at Michigan State under Mark D'Antonio. The only missing link there is, do they have enough firepower on offense? I think that's the type of game where if Notre Dame scores 20, 24 points, they can still come away with the victory. Maybe even 17. There have been some games there with Pitt that has been like that. They have a great history against Notre Dame. Always seem to play them right down to the wire every single year. So that's another team that's intriguing. And when you get the momentum that they have while starting 3-0, that could be a salty team.
I've been impressed by the defense. I mean, I thought they'd be good. I'm still out to lunch on what they can do on offense. I'm not really sure they have much at the skill positions. And I mean, look at the quarterback, Kenny Pickett. He's a 3-year starter. He doesn't really wow you. I mean, yeah, they can put up 50-something points or whatever it was on Austin Peay and smack them around as an FCS team. But I'm not sure their offense will be passable to even put up 3 touchdowns, say, on Notre Dame. I still think that's going to be their hardest road game at Notre Dame's. But, yeah, if anything is going to cap – more so than North Carolina, yes. Just because it'll be one of those ugly games where almost like a service academy football strategy where it's like when you have a talent discrepancy or a schematic disadvantage or whatever, where you just hope to ugly it up, take as much time as possible as you can, and just hope you're ahead by a field goal at the final horn. North Carolina, I can just look at seeing a shootout as who has the ball last, whatever, or who knows. But yeah, I think Pitt will just be some sloppy game that can kind of go wherever, ugly, low-scoring thing.
If you have North Carolina's offense combined with Pitt's defense, then
Clemson.
You have a contender. You have
Clemson.
Yeah, you have a viable contender.
And I know there's one team that a lot of you Notre Dame fans have been paying attention to, probably unhealthily closely. And that's Boston College. Because they're 2-0. They have Phil Jurkovec. Yes, he's starting. And had to rescue them from what would have been a really, really bad loss at home against Texas State, who won 3 games last year. But they're 2-0. At least it made that November game against Notre Dame seem intriguing more so. We'll see what happens in the 2 months until then. But I don't know about you. I mean, look, we see every time we post a thread on the message board where about Jurkovec, it just blows up. I mean, the Phil Jurkovec angst is just too much. Like, just relax. It's done. He's not on Notre Dame anymore. Like, it's over. And you're gonna. So I'm worried that some of you guys aren't going to make it until November 14th when Notre Dame plays them, because you're going to look at every throw that Ian Book doesn't make or every throw that Phil Jurkovec does make and think, oh, well, look at this, how much they screwed up or anything. And well, this just proves this about how Notre Dame can't do this, or they made the wrong call of not benching Book last year because he only threw 4 touchdowns instead of 5 against a bad team or something, or benching him against Virginia when they still won by 15 points, even though he didn't play that great. I mean, this is what it is. And whatever you want to say about the coaching staff and their quarterback history is fine, but I think it's a situation that's not that uncommon. I mean, you had a starter who was good enough not to get benched, and you can think what you want about Ian Book's ceiling or the ability to take Notre Dame to all the heights that you all want to see him go to, and that everyone expects here. But this isn't that uncommon a script where you have some quarterback who's anointed as a big thing, who can do big things for the team, and for some other reason or someone else's ascent, he doesn't get the chance and he wants to go play. And I know, look, there's been more things that have been delved into why he left, and that's fine. And again, I'm not going to try to say that those aren't the valid reasons to be disappointed with why he left, but the lengths to which I just have noticed people obsess over every drive and every throw of his as if it's a referendum on the decision and it's constantly changing is just beyond perplexing to me, and it's going to make you guys go into cardiac arrest or something.
I'll go into cardiac arrest if Boston College does beat Notre Dame.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fair.
Yeah, that will be, you haven't seen anything yet. Now, it's not unprecedented. Zach Frazier transferred from Notre Dame to the University of Connecticut after the 2007 spring, because he was fourth string behind Jimmy Clausen, Demetrius Jones, and Evan Sharpley. And lo and behold, 2 years later, Connecticut comes into Notre Dame Stadium and wins. Now, he didn't play a major role in that. They had a couple of backs go for over 100 yards. He was more like that game manager for them. And he was 12 of 25, something like 140 yards, something along those lines. But, hey, they won, and it's sort of like, that proves it, Charlie. It's over. Well, you had Jimmy Clausen, who was the number one ranked quarterback coming out of high school. He was your quarterback at the time, and he was a second-round pick after the junior year. So no matter what, that's going to go on and on and on. There's nothing you can do about it. There's going to be an obsession with it. But like you said, there comes a point where it just becomes unhealthy. It's over with. It's done. And it almost has the element of stalking now, as far as, look at what he's doing. What's he doing now? And everything. We could have had that. We could have had this, etc. It goes on. And frankly, I don't see it really stopping, Patrick.
No. I mean, I don't think so. I'm just too perplexed by it. And I don't think
it's no win.
Yeah,
it's
no
win for Brian Kelly, because Notre Dame beats Boston College like 35-13. It's like, well, if he had, the talent that Phil had, the talent that Notre Dame does, it would be different. You can't win. So when you have that kind of situation, you just take it for whatever it's worth.
I like you said, I think the folks who are just so far latched onto this will find some other thing or way to discredit or goalpost to move or whatever. Well, if this happened, or what aboutism or something. And I want to make clear that I don't think it's okay, you can be upset that it didn't work, and that's fine. And if you want to say that they didn't do a good enough job with him, and whatever strife with him and the coaching staff led to his exit, that's totally fair. Like that makes sense. But the whole referendum on as if it was a choice, or as if they were reasonably going to bench Ian Book for him, and especially from what we had seen out of Phil in the spring games and things. I mean, it's just kind of nauseating. And although I will say this, if it's close, that game in November, or if, heaven forbid, Boston College beats Notre Dame, it'll be spicy, and I can enjoy spicy, and especially in that series hasn't had spiciness in a little while. So yeah, all right. I need to stop talking about Phil Jurkovec. Let's get out of here, Lou, and enjoy what was our scheduled bye week off weekend. You going apple picking or doing any of that fun fall activities?
Oh, just the regular fall activities. And watch some football too, man.
Yeah, we've got football. I mean, when November 21st is probably the next time we'll get to enjoy a full Saturday of college football, right? And again, that's assuming that Notre Dame plays all the games until then, which, yeah, as if there's one thing to be learned from the past 40 whatever minutes we spent on here, is that's not always going to be the case. But thank you for listening. And once again, please rate, review, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us 5 stars and nice comments if you love what we heard. If you do so, we'll love you. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the thumbs up button, like this video, subscribe to our YouTube page. You can follow us on Twitter at Patrick Engel _, that's ENGEL, and at BGI _ Lou Somogyi, SOMOGYI. We will talk to you again next week, get more into that Florida State game if indeed it does progress to that point. Until then, take care.